In this episode of My Teen Life, we'll hear from two young people who successfully resisted the temptations to have sex. How do they do it?
Well, every day in high school, my classmates would talk about sex.
They would just talk about, their boyfriends and girlfriends, what they did with them, over the weekend, what they're going to do.
They, of course, knew that I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses and that I wouldn't engage in premarital sex, but that did not stop them from pushing.
Guys would invade my personal space. Sometimes they would even try to, grab or touch me.
One day, a girl in class, she asked me to touch her inappropriately. Of course, I rejected her, but she even resorted to calling me names. She called me lame, and she said that I must be gay.
It seemed to be a game to them to try to break me and try to get me to do things with them. But the fact that I wouldn't give in, they thought it was fun or funny.
It got to the point where this became very physical. I had two classmates behind me that were pushing me, one classmate on each side of me, grabbing my arms and pushing me, trying to make me touch her. And I knew that it was time to get out of there.
We're watching the October 2022 episode of JW Broadcasting, and it's time for another installment of My Teen Life, the show that sort of mimics YouTuber vlogs. Essentially, we're seeing young Jehovah's Witnesses pretending to speak candidly when so obviously what they're saying is either scripted or what they're expected to say by the people behind the camera. The biggest problem I have so far is that this particular episode, episode 6, has the theme, how can I fight the pressure to have premarital sex? What's been described doesn't seem to fit this particular question.
Guys would invade my personal space. Sometimes they would even try to, grab or touch me.
That's not pressure to have premarital sex. That's sexual harassment. If the episode were titled, How Can I Deal with Sexual Harassment? That would be an appropriate story to tell. But how do you file this scenario under pressure to have premarital sex? If someone is experiencing sexual harassment, they need to be involving the authorities. In this case, they should be going straight to the principal's office and saying, this person in my class was invading my personal space and trying to grab or touch me. It's a serious matter. And yet, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, this is something where it's a religious thing. This is a situation where Bible verses need to be wheeled in. It's all about being a good person. You can deal with these scenarios where you're being sexually harassed so long as you're a good enough Christian.
Shortly before this incident, my grandmother actually prepared me. She would prepare Watchtower articles for me that talked about how to deal with temptation. Although those talks with her were super duper awkward, if I'm being honest, they really helped me to stay spiritually strong and to resist the temptation.
My parents always told me to use far-sighted wisdom. Think about how that action would affect me in the future, affect my relationship with Jehovah, with my friends and my family. That definitely went through my head a lot during that time. All you need to do is trust in Jehovah, because if you trust in him, then everything is going to be okay.
Where do we even begin on this? I'm not even as incensed as I thought I would be about the whole sexual repression aspect of this, which is actually quite triggering as someone who's been raised in an organization that says you're not allowed to masturbate, you're not allowed to have sex before marriage, you're not allowed to be gay, you're not allowed to marry someone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. You're not allowed to look at porn. All of these restrictions that change who you are as a person, that stifle a profound part of your psyche. This sexual repression is rampant in this particular episode of my teen life. But what infuriates me more than anything is that they have referred to at least one clear example of sexual harassment where a girl has had her personal space invaded and people trying to grab, or someone trying to grab or touch her. There's no advice whatsoever to go to the authorities, to go to the school authorities or the police. Instead, somehow it's all about her. Somehow it's all about her being a better person. And what really incensed me was this part.
My parents always told me to use far-sighted wisdom. Think about how that action would affect me in the future, affect my relationship with Jehovah, with my friends and my family. That definitely went through my head a lot during that time.
I'm not surprised it went through your head a lot, love. What you're describing is the fear of shunning. We're talking about, again, sexual harassment. And apparently what this girl most urgently needs to think about is what the ramifications would be if there were any actions that would result in a loss of her relationship with Jehovah, with my friends and family. And flashing up on the screen, you see again that verse from Proverbs 22 verse 3, which actually was used in only the last installment of my teen life. Apparently, we can just bring this verse out for almost any episode. It just fits for almost any problem. The shrewd one sees the danger and conceals himself. That's the advice, apparently, for someone in a sexual harassment situation. Have you been shrewd? Have you seen the danger? Have you concealed yourself? Have you tried to hide somewhere? Have you checked out all the possible nooks and crannies where you could cower so that you don't get sexually harassed? Maybe I'm reading too much into things, but that's the message I'm receiving here. It's one thing to say no to premarital sex, which is the theme, apparently, of this installment of my teen life. How can I fight the pressure to have premarital sex? It's one thing to take a position on whether you want to have sex before marriage or not. It's another thing entirely if we're talking about sexual harassment, if we're talking about individuals forcing themselves on other individuals in a sexual way. And the advice that's given in this episode is absolutely disgraceful. If you're watching this as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, how can you defend this? An entire generation of Jehovah's Witness teens are here being told, if you get sexually harassed at school, somehow it's your fault. Somehow you need to figure out a way of concealing yourself, and be careful just in case you end up doing something that could cause you to be shunned.